Good morning. On behalf of our sponsors, the United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha Counties and Wagner CPAs, welcome to BizTimes Media's 7th Annual Nonprofit Excellence Awards Program. For those of you who I've not met, I am Dan Meyer, publisher of BizTimes Milwaukee and BizTimes.com. I trust that you found your way around our online platform and had the opportunity to network and meet some of the other attendees. We're here this morning to salute many of southeastern Wisconsin's best corporate citizens and most effective nonprofit leaders and organizations. Our awards presentation is preceded by a panel discussion which will focus on creating collaborations, partnerships that confront Milwaukee's biggest challenges. Health inequities, education disparities, generational trauma, and social isolation are among the deep-rooted issues that Milwaukee has faced for years. The COVID-19 pandemic this year has only exacerbated those challenges, while also taking a toll on the nonprofit organizations that work to confront them. But amid the tumult and tightening budgets, several organizations and their leaders are forging new partnerships and innovating to tackle these long-standing problems. Our intent this morning with our panel discussion and with our award finalists and honorees is to inform and inspire you and your companies to get involved in whatever way you can to help make our community a better place. This morning's awards presentations will shine the spotlight on many of the region's leaders in corporate citizenship and philanthropy. We'll also recognize several nonprofit organizations and their leaders who are setting the pace for how to do things well in the area of leadership, collaboration, and innovation. The 20 for-profit and nonprofit awards finalists are from 8 different categories and were selected from a very large group of nominees. I would like to thank all of those who participated in the process. And if you're not selected as a finalist, thank you for your nomination, and I encourage you to participate again next year and keep up the great work. We could not have a program like this without our sponsors and partners, the United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha Counties and Wagner CPAs. Here's a brief message from each of them.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Lindner. I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County, and really glad to be with you today as part of this wonderful celebration. We at United Way, we know community collaboration. When everyone comes to the table and does the part they can do, great things are possible. The challenges presented by our current time, presented by COVID-19, are exactly one of those examples. So many of you, so many business leaders, individual contributors stepped up to say, I can help. I want to be part of the solution right now. And all of these great nonprofit partners on the ground, so many of whom we get to celebrate specifically today, each and every one of you did what you could to help people in our community in ridiculously difficult circumstances. We are so proud of you. We celebrate you. We're so grateful to you. I'm always grateful, but never surprised by the passion and generosity of this community we all live in. It's really something incredible. Congratulations to the Nonprofit Excellence Award winners. We are so thrilled to be with you today to help you celebrate your fantastic work.
Hi, I'm Jenny Tarkowski with Wagner CPAs, and we are delighted to be a sponsor at this year's Nonprofit Excellence Awards and to be able to work in the nonprofit community. Thank you for what you do to build our community stronger. This year, more than ever, we need to find ways to work together more between our nonprofits, our businesses, and our community members. We all can contribute. We have a vast amount of talents in this community, and we will accomplish more together. We are better together. We know the needs of our communities are real, and our nonprofits step up every day to answer those needs. We need to do what we can to build resources, keep our nonprofits strong, and be able to answer those growing needs. I encourage everybody to support our nonprofits and do what we can do to build our community. I and all the team members at Wagner CPAs want to congratulate the nominees and the winners of the 2020 Nonprofit Excellence Awards. Thank you, congratulations, and continue to do the great things you are doing. Thanks.
Thanks again. This awards program is an extension of the commitment we have at BizTimes Media, which is to connect our affluent and influential print and online readers and their employees to the nonprofit community. It's also to shine the spotlight on companies and individuals who are volunteering their time and giving the resources and expertise to areas of need within the community. Each Friday, we publish a nonprofit e-newsletter featuring nonprofit news and newsmakers. In each issue of BizTimes Milwaukee, we feature either a full-page paid-forward feature or a nonprofit spotlight combined with nonprofit news items. On BizTimes.com, we feature a nonprofit directory where there are currently several hundred free listings. Our November 9th issue will include our 11th annual Giving Guide, which will feature several articles on corporate citizenship along with a number of sponsored nonprofit profiles. Thank you to all the organizations that participated in this year's Giving Guide. When it's available next week, I encourage you to take a close look at each one of the profiles to see if there's one or several that you'd like to support, individually or as a company. You'll also find it available at biztimes.com/giving. Our November 23rd issue will include a program summary and a section featuring the finalists and honorees from today, as well as photos and other information from today's program. In a moment, you'll meet our associate editor and nonprofit reporter, Lauren Anderson. Please contact Lauren with any of your story ideas. And now on to the program. Our panelists include Greg Wesley, Senior Vice President, Strategic Alliances and Business Development, Medical College of Wisconsin; Carrie Wall, President and CEO, the YMCA of Metropolitan Milwaukee; Amy Lovell, Steering Committee Member, Scaling Wellness in Milwaukee; and Ann Bastings, Founder and President of TimeSlipsç. The moderator for our discussion is BizTimes Associate Editor and Reporter, Lauren Anderson. Lauren covers the nonprofit, education, and healthcare sectors. Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks to all of our panelists for being with us today. Let's get the discussion started. Greg, can you introduce Thrive On to us?
Yes, thank you very much, Lauren. The Thrive On collaboration is a partnership between the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, the Medical College of Wisconsin, and Rural Capital. We've come together, it's a place-based investment by which the Medical College of Wisconsin, the Greater Milwaukee Foundation will move substantial assets of both institutions. For the foundation, it'll have its headquarters located in a building on King Drive, the Gimbel Schuster's building. For the Medical College of Wisconsin, we'll move a number of our external community engagement efforts to that location. And for Rural Capital, they'll redevelop the facility. It's all being done in partnership with the community. The goal is to focus on social determinants of health, specifically those in which have an impact negatively on the African American community, the Hispanic community, the Hmong community in particular. It's a generational commitment. We'll integrate 3 different neighborhoods: the Halyard Park neighborhood, the Harambe neighborhood, and the Burroughs Hero neighborhood together. It's really not a new effort for the country. A number of place-based investments have happened around the country, but we think this is a unique effort here in Milwaukee where we're bringing institutional partners together with a emerging developer, Rural Capital Group.
Thank you. Ann, can you introduce us to TimeSlipsç?
Sure. First of all, it's fascinating to learn.
Thank you.
It's great. I'm Ann Bastings. TimeSlipsç is a well-kept secret in Milwaukee. We're a nonprofit based here with international reach. Our mission is to bring meaning and joy to late life. We focus on one of those social determinants of health, social isolation and social connection. We offer training, resources, and inspiration to infuse creativity and meaningful engagement into all care relationships and care systems with the hopes of reducing stigma and isolation and building community. We have more than 900 certified facilitators now in 49 states and 20 countries. And we really have been blessed with Milwaukee as kind of our lab space where we innovate and develop new programs and then offer them here, collaborating and partnering with all kinds of organizations in Milwaukee. We're really lucky in that we've brought in probably a dozen or more international visitors to see the work that we've been doing on the ground here, to really profile and highlight the work, the innovations on the ground in Milwaukee in aging and particularly aging in late life and dementia care.
Great, thank you. Amy, can you introduce us to scaling wellness in Milwaukee?
Sure. Thank you, and that's really impressive. It's hard to follow that. We are a collaboration of both large systems within Milwaukee, the larger nonprofits in Milwaukee, and then the community-based organizations. And we are working together to come together to collaborate on scaling some of the community-based organizations and to help Milwaukee heal from trauma and to be the most resilient that it can be. We are really focused on helping to build infrastructure in the community-based organizations so that they can be acknowledged and get the recognition for the amazing work that they do every day on the ground, boots on the ground, and to make people more aware of that amazing work so that they will look to them as well as some of the larger nonprofits and the systems that exist.
Great, thanks. And Carrie, can you tell us a bit about the latest at the Y and
Sure.
what you've been up to in the last few months here?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just have to say thank you for inviting me, because I can also see why these organizations sitting here are here, because there's a connection that I can tell should be had if it's not already there. For some of us it has. But many of you know that the YMCA is 162 years old this year. It means we're a fabric of the community. But in that time, our mission hasn't changed. What really happens is we have to continually reinvent ourselves and continue to look at what are the needs of the community, especially as we focus on youth and then working families. So these days, it's all about how do we focus on social determinants of health and focus on the health and well-being of the entire family. So most of the families that we work with start from pre-birth, as parents are planning on having children, all the way through life. And then everybody who touches their life. But a lot of people don't understand that it's really the staff and the services on reinventing ourselves. We've been inspired continuously to kind of be entrepreneurial spirits of trying to figure out who we are. When it's an organization that's 162 years old, there's a reason we're still here, right? It's because we have to continually reinvent ourselves based on the needs. So partnering is something that we're doing more intensely right now as we think about what's happened with most of our programming is in partnership with schools. And as we all know, schools are either virtual, a mixed hybrid, or they're in school. So it's what do we do to support the families? And early on, recently, we had to first start with what we were gonna do of caring for children, of the healthcare workers and emergency response workers. And that's when the staff really got into that entrepreneurial spirit, what we do well, and stepping into it. And that continued from spring through summer and now fall again.
Well, each of you have pursued collaborations in different ways. If you can tell us, how did you choose a good partner? And how did those collaborations get started? Who initiated it? How did you get the conversation going with other organizations or partners? Greg, maybe you can start us with Thrive On.
Thank you, Lauren. The vision started initially with Dr. John Raymond and his focus on wanting to have a greater impact on the social determinants of health and wanting to inspire others. I'll give the abbreviated version. As an anchor institution, organization that's going to be in this community, had been in this community for hundreds of years and hopefully will be around for another 100 years. We're looking for another institutional partner. And fortunately, Ellen Gilligan, the president and CEO of the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, also was on a journey of wanting to have a deeper impact on equity, racial equity and inclusion in particular. And both of the leaders of the organizations got together and said, perhaps we ought to think about partnering if, in fact, we're want to make a generational commitment, want to inspire others to invest, particularly in the city of Milwaukee, try to deal with some of the city of Milwaukee's most difficult problems. And we felt that both organizations, because they have deep resources, not just financial resources, but community resources, should talk and see if there was a way to partner together. After talking and exploring and meeting, we felt like it made sense to come together more. And the Thrive On collaboration was started. It was initially formerly named something else. I won't necessarily name that because we're really trying to get people to hone in on the understanding of the name, which is Thrive On. We use the community to help us to determine the focus and the name. But both institutions, as anchor institutions, centuries old, or centuries experience in this community, understanding the differences that have happened from an evolution standpoint, we felt like we should come together. And then we found a great partner and an emerging developer with Rural Capital, because economic opportunity is also a social determinant of health, and we wanted to partner with an emerging developer who had experience in developing buildings in the city of Milwaukee and partnering with institutions.
I can jump in and say a little bit about the core belief and what we offer at TimeSlipsç is really this feeling that every human being has a story to tell, and that it's about a relationship with the listener who can help listen and facilitate that story into being, and that every human being has a right to that meaningful expression of story in their lives. And so that's right at the core of the technique that we offer. And then from there, it's a series of Russian dolls from the core technique into the way we build our organization as team and listening-based improvisation, all of those techniques that we teach. And the same when we look for collaborative partners. An example of a project recently that sort of shows that Russian doll system in place was actually just in the news today in the Journal Sentinel. We piloted a program in Milwaukee called Telestories. We hired 10 Milwaukee-based artists, trained them to reach out, each one of them reaching out to 10 isolated older adults in order to have a reciprocal story exchange by telephone and accessible technology. Focused in Milwaukee, focused on easing the pain of social isolation in this moment of COVID, and partnered with several nonprofits, Eris, and Milwaukee Christian Center, to identify older adults. And when we look for the shared mission and the belief in that overarching shared goal to bring well-being and social connection to the citizenry of our community at large. And then from there, we work to identify the different objectives, and then we agree to support each other in not only the overarching goal, but in the success of those objectives. That's sort of our philosophy of partnership and collaboration.
I would say too what you're saying, Anne, around a shared mission. So for us, we all were passionate about trying to have a bigger impact collectively around trauma, and so that joined a lot of us together. But as far as being a good partner, I think our partners, there was a shared humility as well, that we would be stronger together rather than one person trying to be an expert, because with something like trauma, there's so many different traumas and so many different ways to heal, that every partner at the table had a space to share their expertise and their knowledge. And I think that it is a lot of listening, a lot of listening and a lot of humility to step back and have curiosity to keep learning.
I agree with all of you, and Anne, it's interesting as you say, it's really listening. I mean, it really does start with listening to those that you work with and serve and want to serve about their needs, and then really what's your focus as an organization. And then the collective impact model is really what we follow, is who are other youth serving organizations, who are other organizations, and now that I know you, with the senior population and so many that we touch, is what is the collective impact that each can bring to the table to have bigger wins for the entire community, but really staying kind of focused on our intention of who we are. And then we always find out what the gaps are and where we could work together on that collective impact model.
And each of your organizations is tackling pretty big challenges in our city. I'm interested in how your organizations have determined this is our lane, this is the thing that we're going to tackle, and we'll leave this to another organization. How do you focus in on that? Amy, I know that SWIM has decided we're going to be a hub. We're going to not be a direct service provider, but we'll bring people together, we'll support. How did you arrive at that decision specifically?
Sure, that was a lot of fits and starts and a lot of pivoting and listening and making mistakes along the way. And last February, we worked with a consultant from Israel that they have a trauma and resilience center called Natal in Israel, and we worked with them. They came to Milwaukee and they were here for 12 days, and we held 39 meetings across all different sectors doing work with trauma. And what we heard over and over was there was no shortage of services, but there was a lack of connection and working together. And so from that, we took a step back to look at, we didn't need to be in the service provider lane. There were plenty of people doing that work, but we could serve as a connector. And people were getting great value of coming together around trauma, and in order to do that, we were constantly having to find space to hold our meetings. And then the pandemic happened, and with the community-based organizations we've been working with, we were a trust where they could come to and say, we need PPE, or we need this, we need that. And we were able to elevate that with some of our larger partners. And then from that, we held a lot of Zoom meetings with them and just listened. And what we heard from them was they needed infrastructure support, they needed accounting, strategic planning, fundraising, as well as like wellness services for themselves, where they could come together in a safe space outside of the people they worked with, and to use their words to fill themselves up so they can pour out. And so that's how the concept of a hub came together, that we could be this hub to not only fill them and help them build infrastructure, but then to give a place where people from all different tiers and levels and work can come together and meet new people and collaborate. And so that's where we pivoted to meet the need of that gap of where we could be.
And I know, Greg, Thrive On recently announced your 5 priority areas.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about how you landed on those key areas for your project?
Well, similar to what I heard Amy just articulating, both institutions are large. People see them differently, and one is a funder, one is an education and health care provider, and also engaged in deep research. The question was, because they're so big, because they're doing so many different things, if we're going to come together, how do we focus it? And the way we decided to focus it was on doing a place-based investment. And other anchor institutions around the country have done place-based investments that have a ripple impact. And so we partnered with the community. We listened to the community. We did deep community engagement, visioning sessions. With the pandemic, before the pandemic, we were doing visioning sessions in person, located in the Harambe area, in the Hallier Park area, and the Brewers Hill area. When the pandemic hit, we switched to virtual learning or virtual opportunities for office hours and engagement. And listened to what the community was telling us their greatest needs were, talking to them about what our opportunities would be, and then we narrowed into the 5 priority areas: housing, economic opportunity, social cohesion, health and wellness, and early childhood education. And we've, I would say, kind of narrowed it into 3 on the immediate basis, on the health and wellness side, on the early childhood education side, and to a smaller extent on the housing side. Now, I can explain that later. But we really were able to come to it by engaging the community, particularly the residents of those 3 neighborhoods, listening to them, engaging with them, meeting them where they were at, asking them to meet us where we're at, finding out what the gaps were, and then reporting back out, right? So here's what we heard. Here are the themes. Did we get it right? No. Then let's go deeper. And when we were able to kind of find that place, because trust is deeply important, you know, people have been engaged quite a bit, and particularly the African American community, the Hispanic community, the Hmong community, minority communities, they're engaged, but they're not always resourced, right? They are not always resourced with the resources that they need. And a lot of times it's the other way around. And so we had to listen, we had to understand, and we had to report back out to the residents. And that's how we were able to kind of hone in on those 5 priority areas. Now I would say that we've developed a certain level of trust, but because we've made a generational commitment, we have time to continue to refine that, to get better at it, and to deliver on the things that we say we can deliver on, and ask the community to do the same. So it's really a partnership that is deeply centered in the residents' voice and what resources that we best can bring to them, because we bring different priorities. We're not, MCW is not a funder per se, but we have deep intellectual capital that we can provide if we meet the community in the right way. The foundation has funding resources, but funding doesn't always get everything done. You need to be able to have, connectivity to what you were saying, Ann. What are some of the ways in which that funding can be better utilized and leveraged? So we really talked with the community deeply, and that's how we were able to come to the 5 priority areas.
And Carrie, you mentioned that, the Y has been a part of this community for a very long time. You yourself have had a long tenure with the organization. I'm interested in, how do you stay true to the mission that has always been the Y's, and also pivoting to meet the community's needs? How do you balance those 2 things?
So if you think about the Y, we're actually in the people building business, and having been in the Y my career for over 34 years, I'm actually a product of the Y, right? Myself, my children, and that's the most important thing that we do, is really building our staff first. And so, we start with very young, but even as volunteers, they can start as early as, they're in middle school and they start working for us. So when we think about that, we really think about the Y's focus areas. We only have 3, Greg. You have 5. Youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. We really hone in on that and the priority setting with that. So we continually focus on the staff, and they're listening and engaging with the members. We do it every day because we get to see the kids, we get to see the parents every single day. We see our seniors. Now, a little bit different right now with the pandemic, but that only made us more focused in on those 3 areas and intensified. So what we see now is that work takes a lot more partnerships, because there's only so much we can do. And as we listen and learn to the needs of especially the youth, the working families, and our seniors, we have to reach out in new and different ways and continually evolve and inspire ourselves to re-engineer how we do that and who we partner with. And that's how we're going to have the greatest outcomes and impacts.
And Ann, you mentioned TimeSlipsç has international reach. What are the collaborations and partnerships in Milwaukee that have enabled that kind of reach and been key to your mission?
Well, I think I'll start by saying we have a really clear sort of eye on the prize of the ultimate integration of creative, expressive techniques into every care practice, every care setting and system. And to do that, we've gone through a lot of systems change work and really trying to figure out what systems and what levers need to be pushed within those systems to open the flow toward that goal and the accomplishment of that goal. And to do that, we really have focused on our theory of change for that at the systems level is three groups of people. We go upstream to students to change, to give them a positive first engagement with older people, particularly older adults with disabilities, in a creative process so that they come out with the skill sets to help their own families, as well as if they even contemplate now having had a positive experience going into the field of care. And when they do so, they bring this innovative approach with them so they can continue to feed the innovation in the field toward that goal. Families and friends who there is just an overwhelming ocean of need for supporting family caregivers, particularly in COVID. If you think of all the programs that are shut down now and caregivers are really isolated at home with their loved ones that they're caring for. So we're really, and have always been feeding that audience and partners virtually through our website, which has a free creativity center and so many resources for people, so that they have the tools at home that they need, but that if they do need to graduate into care, that by the time they get there, they can put pressure on that system to change. We've been doing this, it works, we know it works, why aren't you doing this? And then the professional care setting, where we offer carrot and stick incentives with return on investment arguments and research arguments to infuse these practices into their care settings. And then in order to, whenever we try to figure out new ways to set it into different audiences or work with those different groups, we've done it, say, with UWM, where I'm a professor as well, doing service learning with students, a year-long community engaged program where we student artists live in long-term care settings, getting room and board in exchange for creative community building programming. That's in its 6th year, and again, just a phenomenal program. The Telestories work that we've been doing, integrating creative arts practices through, we're now in conversations with the Milwaukee County Department on Aging to really run these things through Meals on Wheels delivery, telephone well checks, in order to reach the broadest number of older adults who really need this, and collaborating with artists to then turn that material into public art so people can feel their contributions valued and that it built into something that was treated with importance and had something to share to the larger community.
And we definitely need to talk. Our fastest growing market is the aging baby boomers and beyond, really. And with this pandemic, they're not coming to us. We're going to them in their homes virtually with not only programs but wellness checks. And our staff have just kind of redid some things, and our registered dietitian is doing online cooking classes just to form groups of that's their socialization is through that with the others. But I think it's even the staff that work with the aging market, definitely we could be talking about this.
Yep.
Well, it's well documented that the COVID has had an impact on philanthropic activity and revenue for nonprofit organizations. I'm wondering what impact you've seen on your own organizations, and how have you seen funders respond to this idea of collaboration? Is that something that funders have responded well to or are interested in investing in? Carrie, maybe you can kick us off.
Sure. Well, we've got very much more intensified, like I said, of what we're doing and then who we partner with. It's a must. All of the funders at this point and any individual that's donating wants to see that. wants to see how we work together and what's the outcomes, what's the evidence-based, what are the things that you're working on. So it was pretty intensified for us just because we work with youth, right? And what was affecting youth. And as we learned that the families were affected with not just learning, their online learning and what needed to happen, they were hungry. So many more kids were going hungry and parents were out of jobs and what more could we be doing? That's not our lane. So the expectation on partnering to make sure that we're having the greatest impact, we actually reached out to some of our funders and said, who do you know does this the best? Like, who should we be contacting if we're trying to make sure all of these families have food? And then we partnered with Feeding America. I can go on and on for what that worked, that happened. That only brought more, more eyes on the work that we were doing and how we were doing it and the impacts that we were having. We also brought in more volunteers and then more partners because of this. But yes, absolutely. And what we would have thought that there's no way that we're going to hit our annual goals for our campaigns. And in fact, because we really narrowed our focus and really focused in on the most critical needs, that we ended up with more funding.
Yeah, I would say for us, the collaboration, we learned from each other. So the foundation itself really kind of streamlined how it went about funding, which sometimes can be a long process. It suspended a number of the things that it would normally do and, asked people to come together and focused on getting resources out into the community in a way that were needed for the most basic needs, such as obviously food being one. And then the medical college learned from that. And one of our funding arms, the Advancing Healthier Wisconsin Foundation, led by Jess Ehrenfeld, learned and was able to kind of suspend some of the things that they were doing and went out and funded a number of things in their mission areas in a more expedited fashion than they traditionally have done. So there was a learning opportunity for the organizations that we hope that we'll be able to apply on a go-forward basis with the collaboration.
I would say we receive more flexibility with our funder and able to use funds because of the pandemic where we needed rather than what we might have originally put in our grant. So I think that a lot of funders were giving flexibility to their grantees on switching funds around to best support the way the pandemic had shaped the work.
Well, boy, when lockdowns hit, we're 40% of the deaths are vulnerable elders in care communities. And TimeSlipsç has a diverse revenue stream that exists. A large part of it is training in long-term care. And we found ourselves in this ironic position where we had all of the resources that people needed because the pandemic was creating a secondary pandemic of loneliness and failure to thrive, just from families not being able to be with each other, being in isolation. A lot of the excess deaths are around dementia of people just letting go. We had all these tools and they were all virtual, yet the audiences that we were training, where our revenue stream was, were putting all of their training resources toward PPE, and they had what we call this much bandwidth to take in any new information. People the only training they could do was infection control. There's just too much anxiety, too much going on, and all time was spent just trying to get families on FaceTime, which disappears in about 2 seconds if you have dementia. But we were trying to, so what we did was really reorient and figure out all the tools that we were sitting on, how could we repackage them and get them out to the people who need them the most for free. and we didn't pay much attention to the revenue stream that would, so that's not sustainable. I'll just say that, free is not sustainable. But we've been, I think because of the growing awareness of what we are and what we're offering, through webinars, through telephone, through the initiatives that we had on the ground, through products as well. We're sort of reorienting more toward the donor slice of our pie, individual donors, people just pitching in what they can so we can keep pouring out these resources to folks. So you can still feel that we're still riding the wave of adjusting, sort of improvisationally responding to the needs and what's happening out there.
Again, all of you are tackling big problems. I'm interested in how do you measure the outcomes of your work? How do you communicate those to the wider public? And kind of a second part to that question is, how do you know when you should just keep plugging away, same strategy, keep going at it, because these issues take a long time to change? And how do you know when it's time to switch up your strategy? So kind of a two-part question there. Greg, would you be able to?
Sure, I'll try to tackle that. The first data point for us on the place-based investment side will obviously be the real estate component. That's one, but we recognize, and the real estate component can be measured traditionally. We know that redeveloping a historic building that's almost 400,000 square feet will have an economic impact on a community, so that's one measurement. Then another measurement will be about what impact will it have on housing in the area. That'll be another measurement. The wellness component, we know what the health data looks like in that geographic area. How do we focus in on improving the health outcomes, particularly around some of the clinical focuses of the medical college? We know what the racial demographics are, so we'll be able to measure those. It's going to be an iterative process as well because it's going to be over time. We're 17 years at a minimum. So you can adjust over time to determine what's important to you. We know food access is important, so we're going to be looking at the data around food insecurity, the impact of improving food insecurity, access to healthy food. So there'll be a number of measurement points, but most importantly, it's not just about the medical college or the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. It's actually inspiring other organizations that run specific programs to be able to say, oh, this large collaboration is here. Perhaps I should locate there or focus in that area, and how do I do my work better? And so it's just not only our measurement point, it's also giving the community other data points for it to do its work better. So in aging, we know aging is a social determinant of health. We know that there are certain neighborhoods that we're focused on that have an aging population. Does it allow your organization to be able to go into that particular community and do your work easier, more collaboratively, attract more funders to have that impact in that specific neighborhood? That's really kind of the measurements that we think will be more impactful than just the traditional, real estate component or or just saying, well, we know this zip code has X, Y, Z problems, so we're going to go into that neighborhood. No, it's to inspire others to go into the neighborhood who can do the work even better than we can. But we're there, it gives them a partner, it gives them greater legitimacy, greater credibility, and frankly, should hopefully inspire the people who work in those organizations to want to do their mission better.
Any other thoughts on that, measuring impact, outcomes?
Well, because we were incubated in research institutions, we started out with a really strong evidence base, which made a big difference, and really studying that core technique and the process at the root of what we do, improving well-being, increasing social connectedness, changing attitudes of the caregivers, reducing stress, all these things that actually are pivoted on that relationship and the relational model of care, and ultimately bringing meaning and joy to late life and changing the way that we focus on losses much more toward building on strengths, and sort of reducing the stigma of aging and dementia. So how to measure that is always tricky. So we're in a constant sort of iterative process of identifying better tools. There's been really good research, thankfully, in the last, I'd say, 5-10 years around that, drawing a bright line between social connectedness and health outcomes, so that and social connectivity and is pretty easy to measure. So that's really becoming something not just for our organization but for other organizations to look at and say, if we can move the needle on that, we can improve health outcomes. Particularly late life is so hard because people have myriad complicating conditions that you're trying to assess impact in sort of a palliative model, that you're probably not going to extend life, but you're going to increase the life satisfaction of the life that remains. You're going to increase the number of moments of joy and meaningful connection in a challenging situation.
I would say we're at the beginning of our journey with outcomes, but the one thing I think the pandemic and also the racial justice crisis that we're facing, we've been having these conversations for the past 2 years, and I feel like both of these situations are rising it to where more people are joining and talking about it than were 2 years ago. And I think the pandemic also layers on another shared trauma. And so I feel like, if anything, it's shined a big light on some of the work that we're trying to do and hope to show outcomes. We have run some pilots of connecting with our community-based organizations with some pilot programming that has been hugely impactful for them when they're on the front lines doing this work. And that's really hard. That vicarious trauma is really draining, and so we've been able to provide them a space where they can connect and share in relationship in a safe place, and also to kind of refill and talk about, like right now we're doing one with the Natal women in Israel on conflict, on constructive coping through conflict. And I think it's hugely impactful just for people to come together, and we will probably get some outcomes and from that, but we're at the very beginning compared to where you are.
But I think as you think about community health and wellness and everything that you're all talking about, it is more difficult as everybody's trying to measure the outcomes. Our strategic plan has priorities, and everything we do is evidence-based, outcome-based, but really measuring how we're doing at impacting the health and well-being of the community. I think we each have a role in that, right? And this is what I'm looking at all of you. You have research behind it and everything. How we work together, I think, in the future, measuring it as a community, if it's communities within community, is what we would be looking to do. We measure a lot of different ways, but I think that's going to be really important, is how we measure it as communities within community.
I also just want to jump in and say that this pandemic moment has broken almost everything, and that I really hope that from the philanthropic side that promising or evidence-informed, like you're talking about, we're on a solid base, like we're informed by it, but these steps, this is the perfect time to take a step that's informed by it, but not, let's take some risks, I guess is what I'm saying, because we just have to trust, because we're stepping into a space where things are broken, and there's potential real benefit on the other side of it, that we can create something out of the collaborations that emerge in this moment.
Yeah, one of the biggest learning lessons for us is that in talking to the community, you can come in with your evidence-based work, and they're saying you want to help, but you have your model and your standards of success. And are they really working? Because you look at the statistics and they're what they are, and they say, well, you keep giving us the same model and asking us to fit into that model, and perhaps you ought to adjust your measurement outcomes so that you can get better better outcomes. And the investment can be a greater investment because, sometimes it's not working. Look at your health data. Perhaps you ought to adjust the way you're measuring. That's something that the community told us very deeply, and we have to challenge the way we look at things and say, how can we make adjustments that reflect what we heard, that give the traditional way of thinking a little room to catch up with us. So we have to be careful that the same things that have been done previously are not repeated during such a difficult time in the community, and really expanding that gap to a place that may not be sustainable for our community as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's what we were hearing from a lot of our community-based organizations, is that they're doing a lot of work on trauma specifically in the community, but they're trying to swim with the big fish, and they don't get the same opportunities to do that. And so that's what we're hoping, is that by helping them scale, then it will elevate them into being in that same pool with the bigger fish. And I think it is that evidence-based language that, there's a lot of different ways to solve a problem. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. We need to be more creative.
How catching, swim, bigger fish.
That wasn't my analogy. One of our community-based leaders used that analogy in one of our calls. So
that was great.
Well, with the time we have remaining, we can get practical with our last question. You all mentioned that you've maybe made some mistakes along the way or learned some things as you've pursued collaboration. What are the biggest do's and don'ts that you would share with other nonprofits as they pursue collaboration with other organizations? What have you learned along the way? Anne, would you want to start us?
Sure. I mean, we've really sort of set a model for partnership, and to me, one of the most important things is transparency, that you really feel clear and certain that you know what your partner organization's goals are, and that you're unafraid. I think scarcity, and that's my one concern about this moment, as the need from agencies and organizations for funding increases as funding contracts from many different sources as the economy contracts, that scarcity can make people hold back in their transparency, or feel reluctant to be really open and take risks together. Transparency, just to let go of the fears around scarcity and say there's plenty. Have a model and an approach of abundancy, and to I think engage and feed your own creativity. It's sort of what I hear you saying of just always asking, is there a way we can do this better? Is there a way that this unique moment in collaboration can fuel something inventive and innovative? It's, we say a lot of what we're doing is developing creative confidence for people who've lost the belief that they can be creative. And so we remind ourselves of that as we move forward and try to instill that in ourselves and our partnerships along the way.
I agree. We were down a path of, we were going to move down this process of new innovation and new things, but it's really an opportunity of a crisis, right? To become bold and move faster, because it's never going to be normal the way that we knew it. So the next normal, we get to create it right now, and empowering our teams, our volunteers to think differently, and then really actually having these tough conversations with other nonprofits. And it is understanding who you are, what are you really trying to focus on, what we could be doing more, so that we're not duplicating services, but we're filling those gaps, removing barriers, and dealing with the immediate, what's happening right now. I think we're having some really bold conversations we wouldn't have had a year ago. We might have thought we'd want to have them, but now we are, because everybody's dealing with the same pandemic, and we have to really be intentional about what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish now. And doing that together is only going to make it better.
I would go ahead.
You sure?
Yep, I'm sure.
So I'll just say that when you're tackling really big problems, trust is important. So you have to do what you say you're going to do, and don't overpromise, because you have a lot of time. So you got to move with the speed of trust. That's what we've learned. The greatest thing from this pandemic is, and the work that we're doing, is you have to do what you say you're going to do, because there's that huge trust gap. And then you got to, when you do it, don't go too fast. So you think you got the answer right away, and then you say, well, we got the answer, we're going to just go right there. But you got to go at the speed of trust of the community members. So those are the two things that I've learned from a do and don't standpoint.
Yeah, just building on that, I think that reflective listening and keep showing up even when it gets hard, I think, and not letting things spin too long. Like sometimes when a problem's really big, you spin and everybody thinks that there's only one way, and just knowing that you can pick one thing and move forward. And if it was not exactly right, you pivot and you try again. But that paralyzation of just spinning, it stops you from moving forward. And so I think there's like a fine line of how much spinning to do and when it's time to just move forward. And it is that trust and that, and it's prayer.
I'd also just say, I say build an exit ramp for the partnership, so that you're clear that then if something does go wrong for either one of you, or in the process of collaborating, something happens, that you spend enough time in the process of building the partnership as you do as exiting the partnership. And too many people, I think, don't focus on that transition as much as they need to, so that people can feel suddenly abandoned. The trust component, that process might be clear. It might be different for people who are really embedded in a community, who your intention is not to exit, not to have an exit ramp. But for organizations like ours, where your partnerships will be fluid as you evolve, that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Great advice, and I think that's all the time we have, but thank you all for being here. Thank you for sharing your stories. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.